Welcome to Talk South Asian to Me, Season 2. My name is Mashal.
And my name is Anusha. Tune in every Thursday at 5 p.m. Central and hear us react to each other's stories about mental health and growing up in different South Asian households.
And remember, this podcast is not therapy. Engage with what feels entertaining and resonates with you, and leave what doesn't. All right, we're ready for Season 2, letter K?
I'm ready.
What was our K topic from last season? I'm trying to remember.
That's a good. That's
Was
a
it the
really good
kids?
question.
Was it the Dink life? Or no, I can't remember.
think I think you're right.
Okay.
Dink life. Yeah, because I think it was for yes, it was,
That's a good topic
but
too.
not just dink life. It was dink wad
Oh, yeah. Double income, no kids with a dog.
with a dog.
There you go. Yes.
Yeah.
We gotta spell out the acronym, especially for people who have not heard this acronym. It could sound differently. So
Yeah. It's like what is this word?
yes.
It sounds weird.
Yes. But now
It is
we're
an
in
odd
season
acronym.
2. Yeah. But now we're in season 2. So we have a new letter K. And our topic is, are you ready?
I'm ready.
It's the key to emotional intimacy.
Yes. That's a really good one.
Yes.
Key to emotional intimacy.
Yes. I know like a while back, everyone would say that the key to life, the key to happiness. I think it was a reference to DJ Khaled, right? So I think
Oh,
yeah, that's what I was thinking
okay.
about when we were like thinking about topics. I was like, the key to this, the key to that.
I hadn't even thought about it like that.
Yeah. So the key to emotional intimacy. Dun, dun, dun.
Yay. It's a really deep topic in the sense that
Mhm.
we're getting specific. We're niching
Yes.
down.
Yes. And I'm really excited to like get into like relating it to South Asian culture and like what's taboo and all of that. So I'm really excited to get into
Yeah.
that.
Yay. Me
Okay.
too.
So, as always, we start with definitions, right? So I will
Yeah.
define emotional intimacy. Surprisingly, for the first time, I think I'm not using psychology today as my first resource, or like maybe
Yes.
like one article I'm gonna is gonna be from psychology today,
Okay.
but the rest of them are not. Gasp.
Okay. I know. Scandalous.
This one is called The Importance of Emotional Intimacy. It is a blog, actually, written by a licensed psychologist named Dr. Michael Messina. And then I'm also going to reference another article throughout these definitions and these descriptions that I'm about to say. This article is from Choosing Therapy, and it's called Emotional Intimacy, What It Is and How to Build More of It. So I'm going to reference both of those, kind of share quotes from both of those while I'm describing emotional intimacy. It's like a tongue twister. Okay, so first, the basic definition: emotional intimacy is a close emotional bond characterized by mutual understanding, trust, vulnerability, and communication. It is often described as the feeling of being in sync with someone else. Okay.
Yeah.
Emotional intimacy is the sharing of thoughts and feelings with another person in a way that is trusting, safe, and vulnerable. So I feel if we're going to hear a lot of those buzzwords like trust, vulnerability, safety. And sometimes I think, in media and like today's time, like when the person hears intimacy, at least for me, when I would hear the word intimacy, it can go, your mind can go immediately to like physical intimacy, but there's many types of intimacy. And so we're going to go into a little bit of emotional intimacy, but that's not to say that they're exclusive of each other. They're very highly
Mm-hmm.
related. I was reading in this article too that there is a positive correlation between the two, like physical intimacy and emotional intimacy. Usually, if partners feel emotionally intimate with each other, then that physical intimacy also goes up. So it is related, but we're going to
Yeah,
focus on emotional intimacy more today.
definitely. I can't wait. And I'm really
Yes.
glad because obviously you did the research for this topic. So I didn't want to ruin it for myself and I didn't want to look into the definition. But when I thought of emotional intimacy, I was also thinking, like, what is emotional intimacy really? Because, like, we know it, we can see it,
Mhm.
identify it, Like, how do you define it? I really am
Yeah.
excited because you hit the three specific words that I felt and I immediately connected to as well, which were
Okay.
the trust, the safety, and the vulnerability. Those were the top three words I thought of too. I'm so
Oh,
excited.
perfect. Look at you being spot on. Look at that. So, to go further into detail about this, it is about emotional intimacy is about being emotionally open and honest with each other. So, when a person is emotionally intimate with their partner, they're able to share their most innermost thoughts and feelings with them. And I want to also point out it doesn't have to be a partner. A person can be emotionally intimate with a friend as well, like a loved one or a close person. So it's not just a partner. And something that I really wanted to stress today was that emotional intimacy is not a one-way street. To build this connection, you have to let your guard down and trust another person with your private feelings, which is not easy thing to do, right? That's like a biggest thing is that it needs to be both ways. Both sides, both people in that relationship need to let their guards down and share and be vulnerable with each other without the fear of judgment, which is a big key, right? Being judged or being abandoned, all of those things can be barriers to emotional intimacy, all those feelings.
The fear of rejection.
Hmm. Emotional intimacy is important to a healthy relationship because it allows people in that relationship to feel secure in their connection, feel safe. It creates a deeper level of understanding and communication. When emotional intimacy is present, the people in that relationship are more likely to feel fulfilled in that relationship. It becomes more
Mm.
meaningful. Another point also I wanted to make about this, and the authors of those two articles also stressed, was that building emotional intimacy does not come easy, doesn't really come naturally. It can feel uncomfortable sometimes, right? You're becoming vulnerable. That could create some sense of discomfort. So it takes
Mm.
time, it takes effort to slowly build that trust and understanding between the two people that are building that emotional intimacy. Some benefits to having emotional intimacy is that there's trust present, right? When there's trust, that person feels safe to share the most deep thoughts, the deepest thoughts and feelings with their partner or their loved one or their friend, right? The bond has deepened. It helps one
Mm-hmm.
person feel supported by that other person in the relationship, feel more connected. When there's emotional intimacy, people tend to feel less alone, right? In the world.
Mm.
So now I'm going to go into like what are some signs that a person may be experiencing emotional intimacy, and then what are some signs that a relationship is lacking emotional intimacy. So we'll start with emotional intimacy is present in a relationship, and what does that look like? So if you are in a relationship that in which emotional intimacy is present, you might feel that you can be yourself around your partner without feeling judged or misunderstood. You feel safe and secure sharing your deepest thoughts and feelings with your partner. You have a strong desire to please and support your partner and feel a strong connection to their well-being. Now, please again, there's a balance, right? Not
Mm.
people please.
Yeah.
But you want to, make them happy.
Mm.
You frequently find yourself daydreaming about being with that person or sharing special moments with them. You don't feel alone, you feel supported, you care deeply about that person, and they feel the same about you. Anything you feel
Beautiful.
like you want to add to those signs that emotional intimacy is
Mm.
present?
I'm sure there are lots more, but this felt like a pretty good comprehensive first glance. And
Right.
I'm glad that you caught on because I was making a face too when you said, and want to please. And I was like, what?
I know. I have to be like, we talk about people pleasing too much on this podcast to not
Yeah,
address that.
yeah, exactly. But that makes sense. The idea is that you just feel so connected that
Mhm.
obviously because you love this person, you feel so connected to this person, you just want the best for this person. That makes
Exactly.
sense.
Exactly. Exactly. Boundaries.
Yes.
Don't forget.
Like, please, because you love,
But don't
but
people
don't
please.
be pleased. Yeah, don't people
Yes.
please.
Okay. So now we're going to the other side, signs that show that the relationship is lacking emotional intimacy.
Mhm.
So if your relationship is lacking emotional intimacy, you might feel distant from your partner, so not close. You might not feel comfortable to share your feelings, your honest feelings with your partner or your friend or loved one. When something happens in your life, you don't really confide in that person. You don't want to, or you just, that's not your go-to person right away. Um, you don't feel like that person understands you. You don't feel supported by them, and you don't feel like they care about you. So all of those are signs that there might be emotionally intimacy not present in that relationship.
Mhm.
Now, to that point, right? Anything that we talk about this in podcasts, awareness is the first step, but then there's always a way to kind of be resilient in a way, right? So in this case, you can intentionally build intimacy as well with the person if you would like. Again, right? It takes time and effort and intention, but there are ways, and it's research too, that shows that a relationship can build emotional intimacy. Like it's not to
Mhm.
doom, right? If both people in
Right.
that relationship have that intention and willingness and determination, like it's possible. So
Yeah.
how can
Keyword being both people in the
right,
relationship.
right. It's a two-way street.
Absolutely.
Exactly. And that's another point too, is like it's really important to remember like your boundaries are important. And so it's not solely that a one person responsibility to build emotional intimacy. It has to come from the other side for emotional intimacy to be present
Right.
actively.
Yeah. Because it's in the definition itself, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
that connection, but you don't have a connection if it's only one way. That connection
Yeah,
itself needs to be two ways.
exactly. So I have some like few general ones, and then I'll go into the other article that gives you like 7 specific ways. So these are some general
Mm.
strategies to build intimacy with a partner or a loved one. You spend more time talking to each other. You actively listen to one another. So giving the other person a chance to feel like they can open up, share their feelings, and then you do the same for that person, and vice versa. You participate in activities together that allow for you to be
Mm.
physically close to each other, which I thought was interesting, right? Because it's emotional intimacy, not physical intimacy. But again, right in the beginning, I said they're related. So if there's
Right.
physical proximity, that increases the chances of building emotional intimacy. And some examples were like holding hands and hugging, um, just like some physical proximity. Being vulnerable and talking about your feelings, right? Expressing your feelings,
Yeah.
spending time together, being affectionate with each other. This one I kind of was like, I need to stress this because we talked about this, I think, in one of the few episodes ago too, which is that be present when you are together. It's a big one, right? When you're spending time
Mhm.
together, put away your phones, put away the screens and be present at the moment. Listen to what your partner or your loved one in that relationship has to say and share your thoughts and feelings with them as well. Being fully
Mhm.
present will help create a deeper connection between the two of you.
Yeah, definitely. Because you get to like look somebody in the eyes, look at the person that you love or
Hmm.
care about instead of like, kind of just like, yeah, sure, I could do that. Versus if you're sharing something and I'm looking right at you,
Yeah,
my heart is in it. I'm in it.
exactly. So
Mm.
it's just like something like it's just, and we've talked about this too, and I think our digital addiction episode, it was just even young kids are not showing any emotional intimacy with their parents or caregivers, right? They're having
Right.
a hard time making eye contact. They're not being present. There's screens in between them and their caregiver. So it's very interesting how that can also be in the way of not just, all the other things we talked about, like relationships and satisfaction, but also emotional intimacy. So,
And Gen Z, not to like throw a whole generation together, Gen Z, it is like kind of a not a known thing, but it's a kind of talked about thing that Gen Zs in general have like different kind of empathy. They don't have the
mm,
traditional empathy styles. They're a little bit more like dark sense of humor. And
or
I have to wonder,
distant.
is it because most of them are iPad kids and they
Yeah.
haven't developed that level of
Hmm.
connection?
Yeah, for sure. That's a
Mhm.
good point. I didn't think about that. I wonder if there's a study out there that looks at that. Because I think that would be interesting to see the connections.
Yeah.
Okay. So now these are some quotes from the Choosing Therapy article that I mentioned earlier. And the author of this article, Beverly Engel, I think I'm saying that right, lists 7 ways to build emotional intimacy. Okay? 7 ways. So the first one, I love this one, is that it's really important for both people to come from a place of intention. Emotional intimacy will build only when you put in the work as well and commit to it. Both people.
Mm-hmm.
You can't wait for your partner or the other person in the relationship to reach out to you. You have to accept the risk of taking the initiative, no matter how uncomfortable it might feel. Many of us have a tendency to shut down during challenging times, but be sure to remind yourself of your intention and commitment in order to pass these obstacles. I think the author
Mm-hmm.
made a really good point there, right? It's so easy to give up and be like, oh, they don't feel the same way about me, or like they'll never do this. It's really easy to be negative, but it really starts with you. Like how willing are you to put in the work? How willing are you to take that initiative, even if they don't take the initiative first, right? It's up to
Right.
them to
Yeah.
reciprocate, but it should, it's okay to
Yeah.
start with you.
Exactly. And it's a callback to what you said earlier about a big part of building emotional intimacy requires vulnerability. And this is part of
Mm-hmm.
being
Yeah,
vulnerable. Initially, it might be
exactly.
really hard or it might be scary or it might feel like, they're not getting it, immediately.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the part about being vulnerable. You have to be willing to open yourself up if you want to build
Yes,
this and keep at it.
exactly.
Give them the
Exactly.
space to reciprocate.
Exactly. And, thought I'm going to get into this in my story and reflection too, but there's just so much, even though it's like emotional intimacy is between two people, there's just so much individual work involved in this too, which is so interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So number 2 out of the 7 is being willing to communicate. So having good communication between the two of you is important. One example that the author shared was having regular scheduled, structured conversations with each other. So it's like, you blocked out some time, maybe once a week, where you have these structured conversations, or you just share, like you just spend quality time with each other, no screens, no phones, and it's just structured time
Mm-hmm.
available for you both to communicate and connect.
Mm-hmm.
So number 3 is being vulnerability, putting yourself in a position where other people can emotionally hurt you. That was like a really strong sentence straight from the article. I was like, let me talk about this. It's striking, but it's true, right? Literally what vulnerability means is that you put yourself in a position where the other people can hurt you using that information,
Mm-hmm.
right? You may
Right.
need to show parts of yourself that you have the least confidence in, or certainly about, even exposing aspects of yourself that you are ashamed of. In other words, being vulnerable includes letting your guard down, even though that's
Mm-hmm.
hard.
Yeah. I just hope that our listeners choose the right people to be vulnerable with.
Right,
Know who
right.
has the space and who does not.
Yes. And sometimes that fear is very normal, right? I mean, especially in our culture too, just like you're taught to be closed off, not to let your guard down. And
Mm-hmm.
I think this paragraph goes on, I'm kind of just getting the most, I thought the most important information, but I do remember the author also writing in this section that if you do fear of being vulnerable with that person, like you can ask yourself, does this person normally gossip about other people to you? Like if the answer is
Mm-hmm.
no, then they probably won't gossip about you either. Like kind of finding ways to overcome those fears, But of course, if that fear is justified, then if, like you said, choose wisely for sure is
Yeah.
very important.
And I would even add, like, it's that was a really like good intuitive question, right? It's like, okay, are they gossiping? If they are, they probably might be
Hmm.
about you. But I would even add to that, I think the layer here to remember is judgment, right?
Hmm.
Judgment is the thing that stops us from being able to feel safe to be vulnerable. So
Yes.
do you often feel judged by this person in other
Hmm.
scenarios? Do you know
Hmm.
that they judge other people, right? Going off of, do they
Right.
gossip? So I think that's the key part. Do
Hmm.
you feel judged? Do you know they judge others? And if they do, then
Right.
yeah, maybe they might not necessarily be the best source to build
Right.
this emotional intimacy. And that's not to say that they won't be. maybe having a
Yeah.
conversation is important, like broaching the topic without putting all your eggs in that basket quite yet. Something to consider.
Exactly. And then number 4 is focusing on maintaining trust. So, in order to allow yourself to be vulnerable with another person, you need to feel safe, like what you said, right? You need to trust your openness will not be taken advantage of or used against you. So, if, like you said, if this person hasn't given you reasons to not trust them, it's important to kind of overcome that guard that might be up in order to kind of let it down and start building that intimacy, right?
Mm-hmm,
And then,
mm-hmm,
like we talked about, a lot of these fears and that like guard being really high up, right? All walls being built up and strong can
mm-hmm.
stem from trauma and like previous experiences. And so,
Right.
really, like that, doing that individual work, that self work to make sure that all of that is not stemming from that person, but maybe from your own experiences.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. So the next one is practicing empathy. And this is something that comes naturally and easily for some people, but for some it doesn't, right? And so
Mm-hmm,
showing empathy is kind of being willing to understand where another person is coming from, right? Even if it's not
mm-hmm.
aligned with your own experience. So being open
Right.
to that. So practicing empathy and then finding balance. Each person feels free to share their most inner feelings. Not one dominates because right, if one does start dominating, it could become venting or trauma dumping, which we've talked
Mm-hmm.
about in season 1. So again, the balance is important. And then the last one is, of course, remaining open. Keeping an open mind, a growth mindset will help also build intimacy. Yeah. So that was a little bit of background on emotional intimacy. Do you have anything to add or any questions before I get into the South Asian piece?
No, I'm really excited to hear the South Asian piece of this.
Yeah. Oh, I did have one more thing before I went on.
Mhm.
Something that all these articles and authors had in common was it's okay and very normal to seek professional help as well. So even after attempting all these strategies as you know, if two partners are aiming to build intimacy, professional support is also available and is an option. So, and
Yeah,
I've
that's a good point because,
yeah.
obviously you have to feel safe to be vulnerable. And if there's just this big history, sometimes you need a little bit of help to weed through that history to
Mhm.
break down that resentment that might have built
Yeah.
up so that you
Yeah.
can eventually feel
Yeah.
emotionally intimate.
Emotionally intimate. There you go.
Mhm.
We love it. Okay. So now getting into the South Asian piece. So I will
Mhm.
say my initial searches, there's not much. There's not much research out there, and I was not surprised just because
Yeah.
but I did find some somewhat related articles that I do want to talk about because it does relate in a way, but not directly. I think the
Mm.
closest research article that I found was a group of researchers that studied South Asian families in the UK and measured express emotions in those families and how they're related to mental health. So again, like not emotional
Mm.
intimacy, but emotional intimacy does have to do with express emotional vulnerability. And so I found like that was a little bit related, but again, it was very not directly related. So I wanted to kind of talk about more of
Yeah.
like people's blogs or like posts or
Mm.
um, these articles that I found that kind of relate a little bit more and tell people's stories.
Okay. You got
Okay.
creative. I like it.
Yeah. I had to because I was like, it was like I literally typed in so much in the
Yeah.
search bar, like emotional intimacy and South Asian relationships, or how do South Asians show emotional intimacy, or right, just like different things.
Mm.
And it was really interesting. You know, we talked about in the beginning that intimacy, the word can have a fuzzy line between physical and emotional, like if the
Mm.
person hears it. So a lot of the articles I found was about physical intimacy, which is another hot topic, I feel like, in the South
Well,
Asian culture, like just a taboo of it.
yeah.
And so I'll go into a little bit of it. So the articles I'll talk about will touch physical intimacy a little bit, but we'll also talk about emotional
Mm.
intimacy. So this first article is from Muslim Girl. It's a website, and the author was listed as MG staff. So, and that's kind of like the staff together wrote this article, and it's called "Why South Asian Cultures Need to Embrace Public Displays of Affection," and it kind of goes into what that means. So it's very, very well written. So I'm going to read some excerpts from this article. So, frowning upon affectionate practices like a couple who eats from the same plate, exchanging flowers, or saying "I love you" to each other is very common in South Asian families. It's like frowned upon, by elders because it is
Eat from
considered
the same plate? Even that?
yeah. I've seen that. I mean, I will say me and my
Oh,
husband don't really do that either.
it's like my food.
Yeah, or like,
But I haven't
like
heard that
in
before.
public areas or like gatherings, like in front of other South
Mm.
Asian people in the family, I would say.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Not
Mm-hmm.
thought about that example before.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So some cultures, right, in the South Asian culture, within the South Asian culture, they consider that the love between a husband and a wife should be confined to their bedrooms. And this can lead to people misinterpreting religion and confuse it with culture. So the author goes, the question is, why is it okay for people, specifically partners or spouses, to express feelings of hostility or anger publicly in front of kids and other family members, while it is completely unacceptable for the same people to express affection and love openly?
Mm.
That's such a good question, right? And the next question is, what does this teach children who are watching? I
Amazing.
know. I was like, this is so interesting. It's so true. Um, and then there was just like a lot of like TikTok and social media posts about how, and these were like South Asian users as well, that intimacy, physical intimacy, emotional intimacy was never really modeled for them growing up in their
Oh.
household.
Mm.
And a lot of that has to do with, you know, one article that I read was these a lot of these parents are immigrant parents, and so they're very focused on, achieving the American dream, working for their kids.
Mm.
It's kind of just all those eggs are in that basket, and they're not really focusing their energy on their relationship with each other, like the parents. And so when they're not showing, when that emotional intimacy is not there, it's not being modeled, these kids in these households are growing up and they're struggling with building emotional intimacy with their loved ones and their partners. So I thought that was really interesting. But, while I was looking through, I think a lot of it was just more of like public display of affection or physical intimacy. Emotional intimacy was kind of more described as like vulnerability. But when it
Mm.
comes to vulnerability in our culture, it is considered as a weakness, you know? And so, even sometimes within the household, partners or loved ones with each other don't feel comfortable being vulnerable with each other.
Right.
So
Mm.
that those were kind of the themes that I was reading about, um, and it's so insightful because it's so true. And when I go and get into my story and reflection, I think I resonate with that as well.
Mm. Can't wait to hear. You're giving lots of little drops about.
I know, I know. But do you have anything to add or anything you've noticed just with like the South Asian
Mm.
experience or the culture? Other than your story, I'm sure you have your story too.
Yes. Well, other than this story, what I've seen, like as a from a professional standpoint, as a therapist, what
Mm-hmm.
I've seen with emotional intimacy in our South Asian culture is exactly that. One, it's just not modeled, and it's not modeled either because it wasn't modeled to them
Right.
or because they just didn't have the space for any like thriving capabilities. They were just too busy
Right.
surviving, right? Achieving the
Right.
American dream, etc. But in addition to that, something else that I'm seeing as a result of it not being modeled, as a result of it not being, modeled, is that the other things that are not modeled are like healthy communication, like we talk about, and boundary setting, and
Mm-hmm.
how to respectfully love and fight. So what ends up is all of that gets bundled up, and people
Mm-hmm.
come in with, like South Asian couples come in where they feel at the peak of distance from their
Mm-hmm.
partner. Maybe
Mhm.
even they feel resentment, possibly.
Yeah, exactly.
But the, basic thing is they just come in when they're at that point where they realize they are kind of at like a breaking point of, I really just absolutely cannot see a way through. I cannot stand this any second longer. You know,
Mhm.
I say as South Asians, collectively, we seem to be waiting until the nth possible moment before we're like, I cannot take it anymore. And a lot of this, sure, it does stem from the lack of it being modeled because you don't know what you don't know.
Exactly. Mhm.
Don't know what you are not taught, what you don't
Yeah.
see.
Yeah.
But luckily, like anything we talk about in this podcast, they're all skills. So there's
Mhm.
certainly things that we can learn, that we can
Mhm.
change.
Mhm. Okay, so very insightful. I completely agree. So thank you for sharing. Before I get into my story and reflection, the title of this episode is The Key to Emotional Intimacy. So, out of all the skills that we listed, if you had to pick one to be the key to emotional intimacy, what would you say?
Vulnerability, that is the word that sticks out.
Hmm.
Being able to be vulnerable and being able to accept vulnerability. What
Yeah,
about you?
I would say the same thing, but I would add a little piece in front mutual vulnerability. There you go.
Ooh,
I agree.
I like
I agree.
that.
That's the key.
That is the key. It all comes down to that
Mm.
vulnerability piece.
And if there's no good, healthy communication, if there's no active listening present, if there's no quality time spent, then there's no vulnerability. And I think that's the
Yeah,
key. It kind of
yeah,
encompasses a lot of the other skills to help build emotional intimacy.
yeah. Because it also takes vulnerability to say, hey, I think there's something missing in our connection, or hey, I think we could do
Mm-hmm.
better, or hey, I want more from both of us, for both of us. It takes
Mm-hmm.
vulnerability to even say that. And that's
Yeah,
a starting point in
that is a
recognizing
starting
there is a
point.
problem.
Awareness. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, you ready for my story reflection? I have like a story slash reflection, like my personal reflection. Okay.
Yeah.
So, in my personal experience, I would also say that growing up, emotional intimacy was not modeled. And I never really witnessed my parents showing emotional intimacy. And I know, like in our culture, there might be cases that even though emotional intimacy is not shown like to kids or outwardly, but I feel like
Closed doors.
yeah, even behind closed doors, I didn't really notice any like emotional intimacy with my between my parents, such as being open and vulnerable with each other, or even with us, like me and my sister. And just to give a little bit of background, I know I shared it a little bit in the past. Both my parents are immigrants. They're professionals as well that started working in the US before I was born or around the time I was born as the firstborn in the family. And they also, right, just like many other families that immigrate here, there's a lot of change that they face, a lot of trauma that can come with that as well, like leaving your homeland behind, leaving your family behind, learning a new language, learning a new culture, right? Same thing, striving for that American dream, starting a family, supporting that family. So I do think that a lot of these responsibilities came in the way between or in became a barrier for my parents in a way, in addition to, of course, attributing all of this to the intergenerational and cultural beliefs that showing emotional emotions and vulnerabilities is a sign of weakness. I think it was just like lots of layers and combination of that, all of that.
Mm.
Right? Because my parents were focused on surviving, and their early years of their marriage, even though it was arranged, they were separated for a little bit too. So that I think plays a role as well as a barrier, right? We talked about how physical proximity is important as well to build emotional
Mm.
intimacy. So the idea of emotional intimacy being two-way was also not really shown. I would say like sometimes my mom would show a little bit more emotional intimacy than my dad. Like I would notice that growing up, but it wasn't really reciprocated.
Mm.
And again, right,
Mm.
it needs to be two-way. And I remember, like, when I was young, my curious self, like, again, trying to maybe build emotional intimacy with my mom, like, I would ask her personal questions about her past and how she grew up and all of that, her parents. And I remember like that was leading her to feel vulnerable, and she would just shut it down and get like, no, we don't
Mm.
need, like, let's not talk about that. Or, and then maybe it was just, again, making her feel uncomfortable talking about that or reliving trauma that could be triggering. So I understand. And there was like a couple times where me and my sister felt like would try to communicate our feelings to our parents on how they would treat us, or how, again, we talked about this in last season about like biculturalism and like, you know, all of that, that identity, kind of navigating our home culture versus the westernized culture. And so like we would communicate how we feel about that, or how we want to spend time differently with our parents, and our parents would get really defensive instead of like reciprocating that emotional intimacy, kind of would shut it down
Mm.
again. And so our emotional intimacy that we were trying to share with our parents was not getting reciprocated. But I would say the emotional intimacy that me and my sister share with each other is very, very strong. It's very there. And I think
Mm.
we developed that very early on. Um, we do this thing where we do like sister date nights, like we call it BJ's night at the BJ's restaurant. Like we always go there every now and then when we're visiting each other. And that started out when we were just like, I was in college and she was in high school or middle school. And so
Mm.
we had structured time, I guess, in a way, right? We have structured time to talk to each other, feel like we can share anything with each other without feeling judged, right? We felt vulnerable with each other. We feel open and honest with each other. And I'm really grateful for that. I think that really, that probably, I would say, was my first emotionally intimate relationship in my life, and really taught me in a way to how to like really be emotionally intimate with someone, be open with someone. But I will say, just because of how my parents interacted and how that emotional intimacy was not received and it reciprocated with my parents' relationship and seeing it with between my parents, I will say I did struggle still, um, when it came to other people, building emotional intimacy with other people, especially during my teen and adult years. I would say that I felt a sense of distrust toward others, you know, even if no one gave me the reason to, like we talked about. Like it was just that past experience, any like my previous trauma that made me feel like I can't trust anyone. My mom's words drilled into my head, like, you can't trust anyone. Like, you know, she would say that all the
Mm.
time. She doesn't say that anymore,
Mm.
but I remember that being drilled into my head, like, you can't trust anyone, you can't trust anyone. And so that would kind of, again, trust is that key word as well, right? For
Mm.
intimacy. So that was really hard for me to start trusting. I would say I even struggled with my own best friends as young as like elementary school. Like I would have my guard
Mm.
up still, or if there was trust, it would take a really long time to build it. But of course, when that trust, you know this, when that trust is built, I'm an open book, right? I'll keep blabbing and yapping.
So
And you
true.
know
You just
this.
need that trust. You need to feel
Yes,
comfortable, safe.
exactly. Exactly. And then, you know, looking into like romantic relationships in my life, again, it wasn't really modeled when it came to romantic relationships. That's something I feel like I struggled with the
Mm.
most, developing emotional intimacy with a partner, and my current partner as well, my husband. And so I would say like I would kind of go into the relationship with my guard up a lot, like, you know, very, very in the beginning, very closed off. And sometimes I would try to be like smart about it too. Like, oh, like I would try to be the people pleaser, right? Like just be the active listener and just do it one way. Like let them be the open book and kind of vent to me instead of it being two-way. And so
Mm.
that's something that I also learned in a way to like build their trust, was like be an active
Mm.
listener, be supportive, be non-judgmental. And I think a lot of that people pleasing tendencies probably stem from that as well. And then, you know, it took a lot of, we talked about individual self work for me to
Mm.
overcome a lot of that. I feel like in the beginning of my relationship, there was just that fear of abandonment, fear of rejection, that all those fears were barrier to me to trust and feel safe
Mm.
and be vulnerable. But my partner then, and my husband now, right at that time, my partner then like showed a lot of patience. He provided a lot of reassurance and support to help me become more vulnerable. And I'll say that seeking that professional help, like that therapy, is probably the biggest um, change that helped me change, when it came to building emotional intimacy. It was kind of like the biggest key for me in a way to overcome all
Mm.
those barriers. for me to be emotionally intimate with my husband. And so,
Yeah, like you were saying earlier, sometimes it's not about whether other people are giving you that space. It's about you creating enough trust and safety and trusting in what you're seeing. That's what you said
like,
earlier too, and that was a good point.
yeah, exactly. Like, am I feeling open? And I think
Mm.
therapy really helped me overcome like my past traumas, overcome the fear of rejection, fear of abandonment that would trigger like my mistrust or distrust. And kind of that, when that was lifted, when that distrust was gone, I was able to trust and I was able to be vulnerable. I did feel safe. And that helped build emotional intimacy between us. So that's my story.
Thank you for sharing. Oh, I'm so glad that you did have so many of these like wonderful opportunities, but not just that you have these opportunities, that you really took them on. You put in so much
Mm-hmm.
hard work.
Mm-hmm. Thank
And
you.
now I hope you're feeling so much more like secure in
Yeah,
yourself and happier in
I
your
do.
relationships.
I do. I do. And it's really funny. Like, I'm more vocal, like me and my husband are more vocal about not like physical intimacy, like we're still working on that, you know. I know we talked about that in the beginning too. When it comes to
Yeah.
like public displays of affection, like holding hands and like that type of
Mm.
physical intimacy. When it comes to public displays, that's something that I feel like is still a work in progress in our culture. Like it's still frowned upon
Mm.
in public areas, even such as holding hands. Like I don't even think me and my husband hold hands like during family gatherings or family vacations in front of everybody. So,
Yeah.
but when it when it comes to all these things, I think it's just so easy again to like mix the two, but they are different in a way. And I feel like
Mm.
one, like the physical intimacy is different and it is related to emotion, but the emotional intimacy just goes so much deeper. And there's just so many
Mhm.
levels and layers that it's just important to think about that it does take time, it does take energy, it can be draining. It's not going to be an
Mm.
overnight thing. And
Right?
that's how it is.
Mm. Yeah. But it can be so worth it, because it's like your soul just feels so seen and like so safe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And to have that connection of true, true, deep, deep safety of just being able to be yourself,
Mm-hmm.
that's a beautiful thing.
It is. It is.
Yeah. And it doesn't always need to be met by everybody. But even
Mm-hmm.
having like that one or two or three people that
Mm-hmm.
you get to have that with can be really beautiful.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm. Well, thank you for sharing, darling.
Yeah, thank you for listening.
Always ready to listen to your stories. Are you ready for mine?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay. Well, I have, like you, I had a reflection and then like an example.
Okay.
So, as I was reflecting on emotional intimacy, and like I said, I did not even look up the definition. I wanted to
Mm-hmm.
just go into this completely blind
Mm-hmm.
so that you can wow me with your research.
Mm-hmm.
And the words that immediately came to my mind were safe space, vulnerability, trust. These were the three things that really came up immediately. So when
Mm-hmm.
I thought about it from that perspective of trust, vulnerability, and safe space, what I thought about was children.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you think about it, children just have this like beautiful, innocent, like easy to trust kind of embodiment of those
Yeah.
characteristics, right? And so I
Yeah.
was thinking of how like children make friends so fast. You like share gum with somebody, share your crayons,
Mm-hmm.
boom, friendship, right? There's just this easiness
Mm-hmm.
to it as a child to build a connection. And so that had me thinking as adults, I think one of the, I won't say easiest, but I think one way that you can really like get into a vulnerable space and drop the shields that we all tend to have, the walls we all tend to have. The best way to do that are like some kind of form of icebreakers, right? Where you just get goofy essentially.
Yeah.
Anything to get you goofy and let your
Yeah.
inner child out to play, I think is a wonderful way to start creating opportunities for emotional connection and emotional intimacy like that, right?
It's a really good point.
Yeah. So I was thinking that if you think about it from that perspective and really break it down, what I reflected on was that the emotional intimacy gets built out of many opportunities that are taken
Mm-hmm.
to connect with one another by sharing your emotions, sharing your thoughts, doing some kind of acts of service for one another. And over
Yeah.
time, the more that you do that back and forth, you naturally tend to create a sense of trust,
Mm-hmm.
safety, dependability. And
Yeah.
naturally, from those feelings, emotional intimacy gets built. That's at
Exactly.
least that's how I conceptualized emotional intimacy before your wonderful research. And I think that still holds up, having heard your
Mm-hmm.
research now, wouldn't you
Mm-hmm.
say?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, yeah. And so as I was thinking about it from that perspective, I was thinking that, we can have plenty of family members and plenty of friends in our life,
Mm-hmm.
but sharing an emotional intimacy with the people in my life, like when I think of who am I really emotionally intimate with, who do I feel really connected with, I only feel that way with people I feel safe to be utterly vulnerable and
Yeah.
feel like I'm not going to be judged no matter what. That was a big one for me. The
Yeah.
taking out the fear of judgment is a big
Mm-hmm.
part in order for me to feel loved and accepted for who I am, to feel seen, to feel cherished.
Mm-hmm.
And I chose to focus on my mom for this example
Oh, auntie.
specifically. I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to focus on a non romantic example. So, when I thought about my relationship with my mom,
Mm-hmm.
what I would recall was, as I'm sure I've talked about many times when I talk about my mom on this podcast, growing up, I didn't always feel very heard or understood.
Mm-hmm.
She was an immigrant, right? So she
Mm-hmm.
came literally in survival mode to America, trying to build the American dream. And a lot of that stuck with her. She lost her father, while we were here and I was still at
Mm-hmm.
school. There was just a lot going on for her. And so she was really stuck in her own survival mode. She was stuck
Yeah.
in her own grief and like all of these things, right? So despite all of that, or not despite, because of all that, I should say,
Mm-hmm.
I felt that I couldn't always be like vulnerable because I didn't feel safe. My emotion,
Mm-hmm.
my thought process didn't always feel safe to be validated.
Mm-hmm.
And not to mention this feeling or this thought of like this is not a safe space for my all of my emotions came about from things my mom said, but also maybe things not said. Things
Okay.
she did say, for example, are like she used to say like, "Why are you mopey? Smile.
Mm-hmm.
You make me happy when you smile. Smile." And that taught me, right? Like over time, that taught me that they're just emotions that we show, and they're emotions we don't show.
Yeah.
And that I talked a little bit about in the past. So
Mm-hmm.
basically, though, there definitely was not space for my more heavier, ickier emotions like frustration or sadness or anger. Um, and I kind of learned pretty early on that even if mom would say things like, "Hey, you can tell me anything and like it's fine. I'm here for you. Who
Mm-hmm.
else is going to be here for you? I've got you." I learned early on that saying it was one thing, embodying it is a whole other thing. Because if
Yes.
I did get into a space where I felt like, maybe I can trust mom on this and I want to, and I shared, I felt judged. Like she did
Mm-hmm.
judge well, you shouldn't feel this way. And she's not coming from a mean place. She's coming from my baby's hurting. I don't want her to hurt. I need to tell her to not feel this way because I don't know
Yeah.
how to walk her through this emotion. So she would say, well, that's okay. That's not a big deal. Like, don't feel sad. Don't feel upset about that. It's not a big deal. Or I would get in trouble if it was like anger, perhaps, or frustration about something. She'd be like, well, don't question me, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and her fear kind of squashed my feelings. And so it left me invalidated and it left me feeling like I didn't have a safe space.
Mm-hmm.
But like you, a turning point for me and the relationships around me was my therapy. So when I went to therapy, among all the things that I learned, one of the things I learned was that I was absolutely allowed to feel whatever I felt and that was okay and that was
Mm-hmm.
healthy.
Yeah.
So unlearning unhelpful thoughts and beliefs, learning how to validate myself went
Mm-hmm.
a long way for me to start accepting who I was, building trust, and vulnerability, first and foremost, with myself.
Yeah.
And once I felt like I had space to just be vulnerable and accept who I was, then I started pushing back when I didn't feel heard.
Mm.
Because I had all this frustration and had nowhere to go. And at that time, I didn't really know how to effectively channel it, but
Mm-hmm.
I pushed back. And that made a huge difference. That was kind of a turning point for me and for my relationships, particularly with my family,
Mm-hmm.
because I had never pushed back on anything. I was such a people pleaser. I was always so
Mm-hmm.
amenable, such a good girl, that I had never really put my foot down. So that was kind of like
Yeah.
a shock, a collective shock for everybody. Like, what's happening? I have to pay attention. I need to understand what's going on. And
Mm.
so I think that jolted them, particularly mom, into trying to understand me, into trying to listen to me and
That's
how I
so
felt.
good. I'm glad that that's how it
Yeah.
was received. Like,
Yeah. And
yeah.
it sucks that it took like that kind
Yeah.
of intense pushback and frustration and like sadness to be received, but it did get received. And
That's
that's always a
good.
bonus, right? Sometimes you need something really to like shake up the status quo,
Right.
as
I
it were.
agree. 100%.
Yeah. Yeah. So eventually, as she was trying to show me, she was trying to understand me, trying to hear me, trying to validate me, that's when I felt like I could really just say what I needed to say. And obviously, it's not like magically our communication got better. It's not
Mm-hmm.
like magically she just suddenly agreed with me and understood and like totally knew how to validate me. But we worked on it together because I chose to open the path for vulnerability and just
Mm-hmm.
lay it out there, everything I was feeling in a very like radically honest way. Even saying like, I know you're going to be disappointed or you're going to feel hurt if I say this, but I need to say this, that kind of radical
Yeah.
honesty. And it really allowed my mom to like take a moment, internalize what I was saying, recognize how like some of the words she said or her intent and her execution didn't really match up. And she made a conscious decision to learn with me.
Nice.
So we learned together how to change our perspectives, how
Mm-hmm.
to communicate in a way that we both felt heard. And I think that was a really, really important, pivotal moment because then it also allowed my mom to be vulnerable. She shared how
Mm-hmm.
she felt. She shared her past experiences that she now wanted me to know. So that
Wow.
was a really, really like pivotal moment for us to be able to start, like I said, mutually practicing vulnerability.
Wow.
Yeah. And I guess that's it. That was a pivotal moment. Never looked back since. It's not perfect. We still get into moments where perhaps she struggles with fully understanding and respecting some things,
Mm-hmm.
like some boundaries specifically, but there is no, there's no like dependence on mom to fully receive it every single time. I understand that this is something she's also learning. This is also new to her. And I don't need
Mm-hmm.
her to fully 100% get everything all the time.
Yeah.
There's room for lack of understanding, there's room for growth always. And where she doesn't understand, I understand myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I can get someone else to understand that part of me that maybe mom doesn't understand. And that's okay. Because ultimately, my need is my need, but who meets that need is absolutely variable. And while it's important to us, it does not matter at the end of the day who
Right.
meets that need. So
Right.
that was another like really important lesson I had to learn is it's okay if mom doesn't understand some things. I don't need her to. I just need her to be willing to.
Wow. Yeah. Progress over
Yeah.
perfection.
Progress over perfection. Exactly. One of our favorite sayings.
Yes. Yes. I did not
Um,
know that you and your mom were at that level. It's so amazing and inspirational to hear how much your work has influenced her, which is amazing. Like your
yeah.
self work
Yeah.
has influenced her.
It really was truly one of the most important moments of my life, I feel like, because I had never felt truly, truly like understood and accepted, or at the very least, I didn't feel. There were moments, I think, in my teenage years, especially when I was in high school, where I didn't even feel like I questioned, like, does my mom
Mm-hmm.
even love me? Like, she doesn't even try to understand me.
Mm.
And so it was really, really important to me that I
Yeah.
have that like glow up or whatever, because it showed me, of course course she cares. Of course she wants to
Yeah.
understand. She just doesn't have, at least at that point, the ability, the knowledge, the know-how, the
Mm-hmm.
skills to do that. So I
Yeah.
think that was like one of the most important pieces for me to understand, but also for her to understand. So we could actually have the kind of relationship that we wanted. That was
I
there, but we just didn't get to see.
yeah.
Yeah.
I love it. That's amazing. Very inspirational, very inspiring that even,
Yeah.
your mom's generation is very capable of, despite, all the barriers and the immigrate, like the struggles that may come from immigrating, right? All the trauma, the grief, like you mentioned, there's some resilience there. And with, boundaries and modeling that behavior, even as the younger generation, they have potential as well to grow in
Yeah.
this way. It's
Yes,
amazing.
breaking cycles all over the place.
Yes, exactly. Breaking
Yeah.
cycles.
Yeah. So that's my story.
That's awesome.
Mm. Shall we wrap up our session today then? Oh my God, I called it a session again. Oh Lord. Shall we wrap up our episode today?
That sounds good to me.
All right. So, as always, if our podcast has resonated with you, our lovely listeners, you can reach out to us and share your stories or ask us any questions. You can reach out to us at our Gmail account, talksouthasiantome@gmail.com, or you can find us on all the socials at the handle at talksouthasiantome. Catch you all next episode, not
Thank
next
you for
session.
listening. Thank you.